My name is Amanda Knowles. If you don't know who I am, I run the Art Gallery and also teach in the art department here. It is my pleasure to be introducing you to such a wonderful human being. But before we do that, I want to do the land acknowledgement. So, on behalf of North Seattle College, we acknowledge that we occupy the traditional ancestral lands of the Coast Salish peoples, specifically the Duwamish tribe, a people that are still here, continuing to honor and bring to light their ancient heritage. Without them, we would not have access to this gathering, dialogue, and learning space. We ask that we take this opportunity to thank the original caretakers of this land who are still here. Thank you. When I first talked to Michael about the introduction, he said, just so you know, my resume is boring, so why don't you try the B side, the more human side of the whole thing, other side of the record. It says a lot about our culture, this culture that I'm completely steeped in, that this terrified me, right? Facts I could do. Michael came from Seattle from Houston, Texas.
Dallas.
Oh, Dallas. Damn it, sorry.
It's okay.
See, I can't do facts. From Dallas, Texas, to go to business school at Bainbridge Graduate Institute. But to tell you more about Michael, the Michael that I got to know during the 2 months of this show, that seemed hard. But it's not. This is what I know about Michael. Michael is willing to change this society, taking the time to lead with love the way that Bell Hooks has urged us to do. He is open to the conversation, whatever it is, and allows the time for the conversation to run its full course. From my perspective, he sees others and finds inspiration in them, continuously, and he is interested. I cannot say this more strongly. It has been a pleasure to work with him. He will be in the gallery after the talk, just in that vein of giving more of himself than most people. He'll be in the gallery after the talk. If you have a question that you don't necessarily feel like you want to ask in front of a million other people, you can go over there and talk with him one-on-one. And I highly recommend that, because it's a pleasure to do that. But without further ado, Michael B. Maine.
Thank you, Amanda. I haven't been able to swing my legs in a while. First of all, can you all hear me?
Yeah.
Perfect, cool, thank you. If anybody needs anything from me, if you need me to slow down, I tend to be kind of monotone, so if you find yourself falling asleep or anything like that, feel free to stand up, wave, be human. As far as I'm concerned, you're human first, and take care of yourself. And if there's anything you need from me, feel free to let me know. I do my best to accommodate needs. I try not to be very defensive. I just change whatever needs to change for you to be comfortable. With that said, before I continue, is it okay if I sit on this table with y'all? Cool? Yeah. Cool, thank you. I want to ask, because my mother would be like, I know you're not sitting down talking to people. And yeah, so first of all, thank you for that beautiful introduction. Thank you. Yeah, I appreciate that. And thank you all for being here, especially on a cold, snowy day. There are a lot of excuses that you could have used to not be here, so thank you for being here. And I also, before I say too much, want to give a quick shout out to some people that some of which are in the room, some of which are not. But Lorna Murray is the person who actually reached out to me at the very beginning of this project and said, hey, I want you to be the photographer to do this thing. And so I just want to make sure that I call Lorna out, because without her coming to me, I wouldn't be here right now. So thank you to Lorna, who's not here, but not here physically in this space, but very much is part of this experience and project and everything. North Seattle College, thank you all for hosting me and having me here. This is my first time actually having any of my work shown in a dedicated art gallery. So thank you for making this the home. I felt all special. I called my mom yo, mama, what's up? I'm in an art gallery now. Both my parents are accountants, so when I first started, like when I first switched from finance to art, they were like, oh no. And I'm the oldest grandson, the oldest child, so they were like, yes, you set an example. No, that's not what you're supposed to do. So they're very proud of me now, and so, again, thank you. Amanda Knowles, thank you very much. I think I might have lost where you are in the room. But Amanda, oh, there you are, thank you. Amanda has been very, very instrumental, very helpful, very supportive, and I just really appreciate how you have been, first and foremost, a great human to work with, also a great teacher. I've seen the way you interact with the people around you and the love that you bring to them and the love that they reciprocate with you. So I just wanted you to know that growing up, I always wanted to be an artist, but was afraid to actually pursue any of those interests. And a lot of it was because I was afraid that if I was in an artist community, I'd be surrounded by people who were just, you know, like terrible humans. And those are stereotypes, not cool. But watching TV, watching movies, and the access that I had to media was pretty limited growing up. I didn't really have access to museums and art shows and things like that. So the perception that I held of artists, especially the artists that I've seen, were what interviews that I would watch and things like that. And I didn't really like what I saw most of the time. And so entering the world made me very nervous because I was like, oh man, who am I gonna? And Amanda was one of the first people that I really had to have like intimate conversations with and interactions with in this kind of a setting. So thank you for making that such a wonderful experience. And then some of the people that you'll see featured, Sharon Nyree Williams, who is also the person who you heard if you were walking in. She does poetry and is also the executive director of Central District Forum for Arts and Ideas. Yes, got it. Whew. I hope she doesn't watch this video. Chandra Hampson, Reagan Jackson, Melissa Hall, Sheree Lascelles, and also Oliver Villafuerte is the person who did all the makeup. So I want to make sure everybody on the team gets recognized, because as far as I'm concerned, any work that I do is always a collaboration, even if I'm the only person with a tool in my hand, if you will. Now, with that being said, I tend not to be one who likes to just talk at people. I know for me that's pretty boring generally. If that's what you want, I have plenty of content. I can do that. But I would like to invite anybody, if you have seen the show or if you haven't, if you have any questions that you definitely want me to cover over the next 45 minutes or so, feel free to voice those, ask those comments. What did you feel when you saw the work, et cetera, et cetera. Pause. How many of you have seen the show? Okay, cool. So there's some hands. Perfect. Cool, cool. If you haven't, that's cool. Not a prerequisite. Just asking. Did anybody have any initial feedback, questions, concerns, anything like that? And again, don't feel pressure, but I'm curious to bring your voice into the space before I just start talking at you or anything. And I'm an introvert, so I'll give a couple seconds. Yes.
Well, you know, I could see the show from this classroom where I teach, and they just drew me in from far away, and I think I thought they were paintings at first. Mm-hmm. That's because I'm a painter.
No, that's fine.
I was just so amazed at like the quality of the photographs, especially that large scale. I just thought they were beautiful, and so for me, the imagery was really powerful, but it was also the quality of the image, and I think that combined made them even more spectacular.
Thank you.
Yeah, because I wanted to go and see them up close, because if they were that stunning from far away, and then I got closer to them, I was really impressed.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Yes.
The day that they went up, there were people flocking to the windows. They're wait, what's going on? So it's literally not. Yeah.
Cool. Yes.
We're just going to forward the I'm teaching an art business class here, and so we're planning a show. And so one of the things I'm curious about is what was the initial approach that Lorna came to you with, and how did that maintain course or change course?
Thank you. what was the initial approach and what was consistent and what changed? Is that okay?
Yeah.
Okay. Yes.
I just want to comment on the power of the printed image because I had seen the images since I work in the gallery, I'd kind of gotten a preview of them on the computer screen and I thought, okay, these are interesting, but then once I saw them and got to like hang them and work with them, it really just was like 1,000 times better. And it just reminds me that it's important for us to go see work in galleries rather than always on our phones or on the computer screen, because the power and the beauty is like, you know, tenfold. It's just so much more. And so I was so excited when the prints came in and getting to like handle them and just see that the quality and the detail is so fine. It's just a great show. I'm really happy we have you here.
Thank you. Oh, made me cry. Yes, did I see a hand? Did I see your hand? Okay, just making sure. I thought I saw a hand going up. I'm sorry. Yes.
I want to know, like, well, in a nutshell, like,
Yeah.
how do you capture that, like, genuine sort of expression? And means, like, do you shoot, like, many shots, like, bursts, or you get to a moment, see it, and, like, capture it? Like, that's, like, a craft of a portraiture sort of photo. And also, I want to know that lighting, like, is it diffuse light, sort of diffuse, and do you use a lot of reflector and stuff like that? Or
Nice.
that's a technical.
Thank you for asking that question. I'm happy to answer those. Now, that's funny because I was just about to say, in this room, feel free to ask any technical questions you may have also. Generally, I don't like answering a bunch of technical questions because I feel like usually that kind of, like, people tend to, not all people, of course, but like a lot of times people will like lose the meaning of the work because they're so concerned with like, what camera did you use and what light did you use and things like that. This is a situation here where I think is really, I want to be able to talk about these kinds of things. And I remember when I was learning, because I actually came to this field relatively late, I didn't really have anybody to like answer those questions. And when I was asking questions like that, they'd be like, I'm not going to tell you my secrets and stuff like that. So I was like, what? I'm not trying to do what you do. Just help me out. So yes, please feel free to ask any technical questions here. I'm happy to answer those. So let's see. So you said lighting, expression, cool. All right. Anything else? And feel free, like if you have critical feedback, by all means, feel free to do so. This is not an ego stroking session for me. So just bring whatever's on your mind and hearts, feel free. All right. I'll give about 5 more seconds. I'm an internal processor, so I like to give people a little bit of extra space. My pen just ran out of ink. So, why, thank you. See that? All right. For those who have not seen the exhibit yet, here are the images that people are referring to. And there were 5. There are 5 of 5. So this is Sharon Irene Williams here. Let's see if I can remember everybody's names, because of course, I'm in front of people, so I'm nervous. So all right. This is Chandra. Reagan Jackson. She's a good friend. Oh, this is Melissa Hall here. Sheree, yes, I'm gonna get through all these names. I'm gonna get them. And yeah, okay, yes. So those were the images. Questions and comments is what I just went over. And then I'll talk for a little bit. And if at any point you have any questions or anything, or you want to stop me, feel free to do so. Again, I try to make things very conversational. So it just, as far as I'm concerned, pretend we're in the living room around the fireplace or something like that. All right. Early influences. The first thing The first thing that got me to really think critically, besides my parents, were books and literature. So my parents weren't actually supposed to be able to conceive children, and I don't know exactly why. They never told me why or what the reason was or anything. But when they found out that my mother was pregnant, they got very excited. Both my parents were from very rural Louisiana at a time where, like, my mother, for example, was one of the people who integrated her high school. She joined a coalition of students from various schools to address issues of race. She got death threats at the house, all kinds of stuff like that. My dad went through very similar struggles where he's from, so when they found out they were having a kid, one of the first things they did, besides getting excited, was panic, because they were like, oh man, we're gonna have a black child in this country, and I know how hard it was for me growing up. And at this time, I was in Dallas when they were in Dallas when this happened. So they were like, well, we don't really know exactly what he's going to need to survive and to really make it in this world here. So they wanted to make sure I had access to figure things out on my own. As early as I can remember, one of my first conversations, or I guess I wasn't really talking back, but one of the first things I heard my dad say to me was, son, you have to learn how to think for yourself. Do things for yourself. Like, when you're doing things, understand why you're doing things. If you're saying them, understand why you're saying them. Understand that there are people around you. Please be considerate. Please be aware of the situations, your environment, and things like that. So I was constantly just being told, like, hey, pay attention to the stuff around you. And it wasn't until I was probably like 12 or 13 that I realized a lot of the reasons that he was telling me that kind of stuff wasn't so much to just like be a nice person in the world, but to actually survive in the world. It was like, know your exits whenever you walk into a room. Know how to get out. Back into your parking spot so you can get out fast. Stuff like that. When you get pulled over, put your keys on top of the car. Things of that nature. And so I had all that stuff when I first started reading, and for a long time they actually thought that I couldn't speak because I was so quiet all the time. I would just sit in front of a TV screen, watch the news or watch whatever was on, and whenever somebody would ask me a question, I would just be very quiet, like I just wouldn't respond. So about, I guess I was maybe 5 or 6 years old or something, I still wasn't really speaking or doing a lot of things that made people think that I was like comprehending stuff that I was going into, my senses and everything. First thing I started reading was the Divine Comedy. And the reason that I was reading the Divine Comedy, I sound way smarter than I am when I say that. No, but the reason that that's the first thing was because they wanted me to have access to stuff and to knowledge that they didn't necessarily have. They just bought a bunch of books before I was born and just threw them in my room. So has anybody heard of the program classics at all? Oh man, I'm getting old. All right, cool. So the program classics they were sold in this huge just sets of volumes. It had like Edgar Allan Poe and the complete works of William Shakespeare and the autobiography of Benjamin Franklin, the Divine Comedies. I had like a full set of almanacs, encyclopedias, unabridged dictionaries, stuff like that. So like, cause a lot of my parents, like as smart as they are and as experienced as they are, didn't necessarily have all the tools, or they weren't equipped with all the tools for what I was going to experience growing up. So when I had a question like, who is this person in history? They'd be like, oh, you got the encyclopedia. Go look it up. What does this word mean, Mom? You have a dictionary, figure it out. So I kind of developed at a very early age a sense of independence and just figure stuff out. Like I just go home, go to my room, and flip through pages until something made sense or didn't. But at least then I can go ask a question and say something like, well, I read this about this person. An example would be Ronald Reagan. I was reading about Ronald Reagan. I was like, Ronald Reagan was the president? And they were like, yeah, he was a president. I'm like, but everything I read about him in the encyclopedia makes me feel like maybe he shouldn't have been a president. I mean, my opinion, just my opinion. And they were like, well, that's cool. You don't have to believe that he should have been a president, but at least you have your own opinion about this. It's not something that somebody just told you and everything. So the Divine Comedy, my dad walked into my room one day, and he had just had a conversation about how they're starting to really worry about me because I'm not reading or speaking and things like that. And he was like, what are you reading, son? I was like, well, I'm reading the Divine Comedy, but it's not funny. and I don't get it, because comedy means that it should be funny, right? And he was like, oh, okay, so we have different issues we need to worry about. All right. So that was one of the first books that I guess epic poems or trilogies that I really liked. Crispus Attucks was important to me because as soon as I started learning about, I was in Texas, so we learned Texas history, and a lot of the Texas history was about demonizing everybody who wasn't entering Texas, I guess, if you will. So how we stole Texas from Mexico and things like that. Santa Anna was always portrayed as this evil person. And I had a lot of questions about why are people portrayed the way they're portrayed, and who decides who are the good people and who are the bad people, and who are the people I should celebrate and who are the people I should criticize. And as I was starting to read about these different figures throughout history and stuff, my dad made sure I had this book because he was like, oh, well, they're probably not going to teach you this about the American Revolution. And learned that there were black people in the Revolution, had no idea until I read that. And that also gave me a sense of pride for the first time about being a black person. Because at the time, whenever I was watching TV or news or listening to the radio, whenever somebody was described as somebody who had a lot of the characteristics that I have, race is one of them, but not always, they were always portrayed as people that were committing crimes or otherwise bad or in trouble and things like that. And I noticed from a very early age that whenever I would see a figure or a suspect on TV, if that suspect was black, they almost always had the picture of them. And whenever that suspect was not black, especially if they were white, especially a white male, they wouldn't have the picture. They just say like this, a suspect and everything. I was like, why is it everybody looks like me is on TV? And so that was one of the first times I actually read about a figure that I could relate to, especially since it had a child on the cover and everything. And I was like, oh, okay, cool. Amos Fortune is a book, to me, it's one of my favorite books. I found it at Half Price Books one day on accident, and I liked the cover, so that's why I bought it. And I was probably, I think I might have been 18 or 19 when I bought it. And I read it, and the story I thought was very incredible. Like, I loved, the story's about an African prince who was stolen, entered slavery, worked his way through slavery, and then rather than just celebrate the freedom, ended up buying the freedom of other slaves. And I read that book, and first of all, I was inspired by somebody who was able to overcome all of those challenges and not lose their sense of self and all of those things. But then I decided, I was like, well, who is Elizabeth Yates, the author who's not on the cover of that picture? But I looked up the author and I was like, Elizabeth Yates is white? What? How could she write such an empathetic piece of work and not have that experience? I actually thought it for a while that it was an autobiography or something. And so this book is very important for me because it really instilled in me a sense of empathy and the idea that somebody doesn't have to experience something for them to be able to write critically, thoughtfully, and respectfully about a subject. I definitely have different opinions about how to engage in that kind of work, but this was the first one that really made me go, oh, I was wrong. My assumption was just really off on this one, and I'm glad that I had that experience. The Art of Worldly Wisdom is a book by Baltasar Gracian or Baltasar Gracian, depending on how you pronounce it, Spanish Jesuit. And I like this book because it was written in verse, almost like a Bible was written, relatively short. But what I like about this one is it made a lot of worldly things make sense to me that didn't make sense to me before. I come from my professional background, this is why I said my resume is boring, is I left college, graduated from college, and then went to finance directly and worked in finance for about 2 years, hated it. Like, I loved the actual work, but I hated what the companies wanted me to do in order to be successful. And so before I could amass this huge amount of money, I quit. It was probably why my parents were like, no, wait a few years. But I quit, and now I think the finance industry has changed in a lot of ways, and there are people doing interesting things. But at the time, I wasn't aware of those institutions or those people, so I just said, can I curse? No, I'll say F it, because it's probably going to be on YouTube at some point. So I just quit and just got out of there and just like tried to figure out what was next for me and everything. And I ended up doing business and marketing consulting for a while. And I thought it was very interesting that somebody who had very little experience with an internal culture or the way they do things was getting paid to tell people how to run their business. I was like, you have 30 employees here who are all giving you this feedback, these opinions, telling you what's working, what's not working, why they like working here, why they don't like working here. And they tell you this stuff every single day. I walk in, have been here 2 days, and you're like, yes, okay, we're gonna implement this right now. I'm like, that doesn't make any sense. So this was one of those books that when I read it, one of the sections there talks about how people who come from the outside are often trusted and believed more than people from the inside. So that is something that A, has helped me in consulting, but also B, helped me understand how I want to show up in the world. So if somebody in my quote unquote inner circle, friends, family, people that I hold dear and close, if they say something to me, even if it's about me, like I don't like how you did this, or I don't like how you did this, or whatever, I listen to that, and I don't wait for somebody who doesn't know me to say like, well, you know what, this was amazing, or I didn't like that. I really want to make sure that I'm respecting and honoring the people who I'm in community with all the time. And then lastly, as far as literature is concerned, James Baldwin, Octavia Butler, I heard some snaps, bell hooks. Thank you for bringing bell hooks up in here too. These are interesting to me because I went to an undergraduate program where I was literally the only black male in my entire class, the only one. And a lot of what we learned, especially in English and sociology and things like that, were written by and for a white audience, which I think is okay. I don't have a problem with that. I just wish there was more. And I love things like sci-fi, poetry, just all kinds of work. But then I started realizing that I wasn't reading things that felt reflective of me, my experience, and also people that I'm in community with. And so I started making a conscious effort to look for authors who were not just of different ethnicities, race, age, gender, sexualities, things like that, but also just writing about different types of content, different types of subjects. One of my favorites was, what's the name of that book? I cannot remember the name of it, honestly, but it was a book about a person who is intersex. And I wanted to do more research on things and just know more about things that are not something that I have a ton of experience with in my personal life or my own identities. Another book that's not up here that I thought was very important for me was The Invention of Heterosexuality, because that was a book that challenged what is oftentimes seen as either the norm or just taken for granted, or assumptions. You know, how many of you have heard the term like heteronormative? Stuff like that. Yeah, like that wasn't really a term that was used until relatively recently. But I was listening to a lot of, next slide, music, which I love music. I love music. And as I was getting older, I started listening to these lyrics that I listened to when I was younger again and again. And I was like, wait a minute, why is it my favorite songs are saying things like every man needs this in a woman, every woman needs this in a man. Also, why are we only talking like the only people that exist are men and women and stuff like that? So I started trying to do more and read more about things, because where I grew up and how I grew up, I wasn't taught about a lot of the, like gender expression, sex and gender, sexuality, a lot of things like that. And so I feel like it's not your responsibility to teach me how to be a better person. It's my responsibility to learn about my own gaps and everything, so I can make your life easier, so you can just exist in the world. I want people, really at the end of the day, I want people, if you're around me, I want you to feel comfortable being who you are. Whoever and whatever that is, just be you. And if you can't be yourself around me, then I see that there's either an issue with me, with the environment, or something is going on that's not allowing you to feel like you are yourself all the time. And that's what I really hope to do. And it's really what informs most of my work. Okay, let's see. I'll pause. Any questions, comments, concerns? Yes.
Were all those pictures your personal choices?
These?
Yeah.
Yeah. I was actually listening to, is Dead Prez up there? Dead Prez, yeah. I was listening to this album, the Let's Get Free album, second row, second column, on the way up here today. Yeah, love music. And also, I guess I should mention very briefly about these albums is, a lot of these albums have really influenced who I am, and not just what I like to listen to, but like Let's Get Free, for example, is an album that I just hold so dear because it taught me about things like eating healthy, for example. It talked a lot about social systems and how social systems can benefit some people and not benefit others, and how that can change depending on context and stuff like that. And I also I'm just always drawn to people who are doing things differently and who are doing things who are able to express themselves and aren't so much worried about how to sell more of the things or how to please an audience, but they're like, this is what I have to say, this is what I need to work through, and I'm going to do it through whatever form it is, or art form, or whatever that case is. Some people do it in business. I've seen some really cool spreadsheets, but I like listening to music more than I like reading spreadsheets. Let's see. All right. Any other questions or anything? Oh, I'm sorry. Are you stretching or? Okay. No need to apologize. You cool. Just want to make sure I'm not ignoring folks. Yes.
You said how you're an introvert and like you didn't be pretty quiet. How did you like open up more and ask those questions that you wanted answered to like, have a stronger voice?
Man, that's a good question. My childhood was pretty rough for a lot of different reasons, and so for me, I spent a lot of time in confusion because I would go to school and get all this praise for whatever reason. Like, oh, you're so smart. Oh, you're so athletic. Oh, you're all these things. But then I go home and just stay in trouble all the time. So my father is a person who struggled a lot with alcoholism and took a lot of whatever he was dealing with out on us, especially me as the boy in the family and everything. And so I was always confused. I was like, why is it teachers at school and classmates and stuff treat me like I'm so awesome, and I come home and I'm just constantly in trouble? And I spent a lot of time just thinking, like, who am I really? Like, who am I? Because I didn't feel like I could really rely on the feedback I was getting from the outside world as far as just verbal stuff. Like, I was paying attention to a lot of body language and how people responded and things like that. But it's the whole, like, you are this or you are that, I would hear that and just go like, okay, cool. Okay, I appreciate that you think that. Okay, cool. But then I would just go home and just think, okay, all right, this person, when I did this, they smiled and they felt good. Or when I said this person cried and they felt terrible. Why, like, what energy did I bring to that situation? What did I take away from that situation? And how could I be a more realized version of the person that I want to be and am and everything? And so to answer your question, I'll try to answer it succinctly. I pretty much just said, I don't know what everybody thinks about me, but I got to be able to love myself and just deal with it. And with that came a sense of like a stronger sense of self and independence and confidence. And then I got to the point where somebody goes like, oh, I don't like your photograph. I'm like, you don't have to. That's fine. There are a lot of albums that aren't on this slide. I don't like all the music. It doesn't mean that it doesn't have value or merit, but it's just not my jam. And so I kind of live in that world where it's not that I don't care what other people think, because I do, but I have to be cool with who I am. And if I'm not cool with who I am, I see that as my own responsibility. Sorry about that. My own responsibility to be more cool with myself. Yeah. Does that answer your question?
Yeah.
Cool. Oh, also, I do stuff I don't want to do because I probably, I'll grow from it. So, any other questions or anything? And I'm pretty open. Like, if you ask me any personal questions or whatever, I'm pretty happy to answer most things. All right. The deviant. I've been fascinated with the idea of the deviant for about as long as I can remember, and a lot of this comes from kind of with that same line of thinking. Was when I was getting this feedback, this external feedback from folks, I would often look around and go like, well, but this person is smarter than me, more athletic than me, this. Why are they treated in the way that they're being treated? And why do we not celebrate these folks? And why do we celebrate some people and not celebrate others? And not just saying that I was always celebrated, because that's not the case, but I would often see people treated less than, like they were less of a human than other folks because of any numbers of reasons. Identity being a large portion of it, but also just because they might do things differently and everything. And I was like, why? But the deviants, those are the cool people. These are the people I want to hang out with. Like when I would see people doodling and stuff and not paying attention to what was necessarily going on in class, it didn't mean to me that they didn't understand what was happening. It just meant like they were doing something different. Like when a lot of these albums up here, a lot of these are mainstream albums, but they do things differently. Like Jill Scott Heron is one of my favorites because I've listened to a lot of poetry on records, and his work is some of the most authentic, heartfelt, genuine stuff that I've ever heard, and sounds similar to a lot of other people. A lot of content is similar to a lot of other people, but the combination of skill, love, passion, and just the honesty in his work really drives me to listen to that album over a lot of others. And same thing can be applied to a lot of the people up here. James Brown was one of the first people to make me feel really, really proud to be black, because that's what he did for a lot of people. But his music, I was like, man, I am excited to be black. Marvin Gaye, a lot of times is known for either drugs or sexual healing, but there's a lot of his music that's anti-war, anti-consumerism, for the people and things like that. A lot of that didn't make a huge splash in the radio, but on the albums, I just love his work. So yeah, when people do things differently, I'm like, yeah, these are the people I want to be around and everything. And on the flip side, a lot of deviance that isn't celebrated, crime, whatever the case is, a lot of times these were friends. Like I personally, let's see, I think I went to 6 funerals of friends before I turned 18. I think it was 6, it was 5 or 6. And these people, most of them were shot in the street and everything, and they were cool people. And even the people, like, I don't like how a lot of times things are put as dichotomies, or multiple things can't exist at the same time. Like people I know, even the ones that were involved in crime, a lot of times are doing that to feed their family, stealing candy bars, stealing food, things like that, or had a lot of other circumstances that made them feel like that was their only option. Whether it's right or wrong was not for me to judge, but I knew them as human beings and felt like, no, this is a person that I am learning from and gaining from, and I wish that they could be celebrated just as much as the people who were recognized for their music accomplishments or whatever the case is, because they're still being creative and providing for the family. Mass media, school. I talked about mass media earlier. I'll move on. And then, okay, at this point, any questions or anything? Cool, all right. Finding my voice. When I first started really getting involved in photography full-time, I was working at an ad agency and doing mostly the strategy work. Our creative director stopped showing up for work, and I was the main person in the office that understood the language of both art/creativity and also business. So instead of running between offices constantly, I just moved my office into the graphic design team's office, and about 2 weeks after that, I was like, man, your job is way more fun than my job. I'm tired of putting people in spreadsheets and reducing them to numbers and and things like that. So I was like, what if I just did this full time? And I tried that, and I was terrible. So I bought a camera, because at the time I was like, well, okay, I don't know how to draw. I used to DJ, but I don't want to do that full time. And a lot of other artistic expressions, I really appreciated them, but I didn't have the skill or anything. But I'd always dabbled in photography. And so I did, as many people do, and underestimated how difficult photography can be. And I bought a camera and was like, oh yeah, okay, I'm gonna make some cool photos, I'm gonna sell them, and then I'll be able to live off of photography full time. It didn't work because I didn't care. Like the purpose focus for me at that point was to buy a camera and just make stuff to sell. And that is the complete antithesis of what I'm about. But I did it anyway because I was like, this is how I'm going to get out of this situation. And of course, it took like 3 or 4 years. And then like after 3 years, I had not made a single image that I was proud of just at all. Whether they were technically good or not, I just didn't like them. And it wasn't until I really started thinking about how would I address the issues that keep me up at night through photography that I started making images that made sense to me, resonated with me, and then resonated with others. And ironically, that's also when people started wanting to pay me for things. And I was like, oh, so to sell the stuff, all I need to really do is go back to the foundation of what I actually care about, do the things, and then that work will actually stand on its own and mean something. I also remember at that time, I was very sad. I was very, very sad, like all the time. Like I wasn't happy in my work. I wasn't happy with the people I was working with and things like that. So I just made a big list because I'm a spreadsheet guy. And I just had the pros and the cons. And I said, what are the things that I'm always doing that I hate doing? And what are the things that I'm never doing that I love doing? And I realized that I was not playing basketball. I wasn't hanging out with cool people. I wasn't having interesting conversations. Wasn't reading anything that I found particularly interesting or fascinating. But I was spending all of my time working, all of my time answering phone calls and emails and things like that. Just all these things I just did not like to do. And I just said, you know what, I'm gonna try to flip these things and make sure that I'm doing the things that I want to do more often. And I also understand that that's coming from a place of privilege to be able to do that. I didn't grow up with a lot of money, and I still don't have a lot of money, but those 2 years in finance did allow me to have a savings account large enough for me to spend a month or so not worried about how I'm going to pay the bills and everything. And I know that's not something that everybody has access to, and I do my best now to provide opportunities whenever I can, such as, and this goes out to everybody who is here in this room, if you need space to do things, feel free to let me know. Like I have a studio in Pioneer Square. I try to open it up for people because I remember what it's like not to have access. And tomorrow I may not have access again. So whenever I do have the access and I can share things, I want to be able to share those things with you. It's not something I'm entitled to. It's something that I happen to be able to have access to in this moment. And I don't think I benefit from preventing other people from having access to those things. So if it's equipment, space, feedback, ideas, whatever, please know that I don't know everything, but if there's any way I can support you or your work, feel free to let me know, and I'll do my best to do that. So yeah, that's finding my voice. And then I had three dreams after not remembering any dreams for probably 3 or 4 years. Those 3 dreams were, I was a Holocaust victim or Holocaust survivor in a dream who was killed at the very end of my dream. I had a dream that I was that somebody broke into my house and killed everybody except for me. And then I also, these are very abridged versions of those dreams. Then I had a dream that I was on the Oprah Winfrey Show, and and it was interesting because I had just started doing research on prison populations, and I'd gone to a women's prison and talked with some women there who were on death row or serving life sentences for various things, and learned a lot from and with them about why they were in those circumstances. And a lot of them were there because of self-defense and things like that. And when I asked somebody like, hey, what is it? Like, what is there anything that, like, what do you want? And they were like, the only thing I want is to be able to hold my child again. And this was a person who went into prison after her, at the time, boyfriend had assaulted her. She fought back, he died, and now she's serving a life sentence in prison, and she had just given birth to her son. And so I think she was serving a 25-year sentence. She was like, I'm gonna miss his entire childhood. Like the next time I'm actually able to hold him, he will be an adult. And I was like, ooh, and I'm not a parent, but I was like, wow, so the entire childhood, because he's in a situation now where they won't bring him, like they can't see each other. And so she's literally gonna miss that whole thing. And so in the third dream on the Oprah show, Oprah goes, all right, Michael Maine, 50% of people love this project, 50% of people say you're glorifying or crime. And the project was, I was going into prisons and creating portraits with people in which they were dignified and respected and doing things that they wanted to do outside of prison. And that was that project. I have a whole lot of, I'm always very critical of the things that I'm doing and saying, because I'm like, how could I do this more respectfully, more inclusively? But that's where I was at that point. And so I went to Oprah and said, well, if 50% of people are talking about how they hate the project and 50% of the people are talking about how much they love the project, then that means 100% of people are talking. That's success. Because my job is not to tell you what to think. My job, as far as I'm concerned, is I want to encourage people to think, to come up with their own ideas and conclusions. Because whatever I feel is right for me and is in line with my values, I don't even know if they're going to be right for me and my values in the future, let alone the future of humanity and the world and everything else. Like, there's a very good chance that whatever it is that I think is amazing now will be deemed as very destructive in a generation or two. Like, how many of you all think that slavery is great? Yep, all right, no hands. Good, all right, cool. That might be one thing, like, okay, I'm gonna tell you what to think on this one. But but there was a time when slavery wasn't seen the way that it was seen now. And there were times where the treatment of women wasn't where it is now. I still think there's a lot of work to do there. But, like, things change. And I'm not the arbiter of what is right and what is wrong and everything. And so, yeah, so that's me finding my voice. And then in terms of a lot of the commercial types of things that I do, I'm always trying to be conscious of what is currently being produced, what has been produced, and what can I add to the field. I'm always thinking about who is not represented, how can we represent people better? If they're not represented at all, how do we represent them? If they are represented, how do we represent people that are in a way that's much more fair and honest? If they are represented in a way that's fair and honest, how do we make sure that we invite more people into the entire production process so that it's not my interpretation all the time, or the photographer, or whoever the production people are, it's not their interpretation of somebody else's life and lived experiences. That is why in most of the work that I do, I always consider them collaborations, because it's never just me or my voice, and I always try to find some way to include their actual words and voice in the project, so that it's not me talking for somebody. And I know what it is like for me to have a lot of people try to talk for me and things. I was one of those inner city youth, and so I heard a lot about inner city youth, and I was like, that's not me. That's not who I am. Like, how about you just invite me to talk for myself instead of you talking for me? And so I try to do that with art projects. Like, if you're a trans person, I don't want to tell people like this is a trans experience, because I'm not a trans person, but I know what I can do. I can include trans people in the projects in a way that's actually respectful and inclusive, and not just like, you trans, I need you for a minute so I look good. That's not what I'm about. And so a lot of me finding my voice is really working with folks to help to understand where people are, who they are, and then work together to make sure that we are able to create work that then brings down some of those barriers and changes that term from deviance to just like who you are as a person and everything. So, I'm gonna pause again for a minute. I think I'm pretty much good as far as like talking is concerned, then I'll answer some of the questions that were posed earlier. But if there's anything else at this point, feel free to chime in, and I'll make sure to try to include those in the next few minutes that we have. Yes?
What do you do day to day? Like, I know that you have a lot of things sort of on your plate, and I just kind of want to get a sense of what you do. Art,
Yeah.
and the rest. Like,
Ooh, that's fair. I do a hodgepodge of things. I do a lot of stuff. I do a lot of stuff. Basically, I've tried to develop over time a set of tools that I can use to address various issues and work with people in different capacities. So most people here in Seattle or in the Seattle area see me as a photographer. people that knew me from before I was in Seattle saw me as a business consultant, if you will. But the day-to-day is I wake up early in the morning. I usually wake up about 4:30 or 5. I work out, drink water, cook breakfast, and then I just basically open up the calendar and say, what are the issues of the day that I'm working on, and who am I working with, and just do things. So I do a lot of production work in photography. I am oftentimes in rooms where somebody's asking me about diversity. So I wouldn't say I do diversity consulting, but I do use photography oftentimes as like a, can I say gateway drug? Is that okay? It's like an entryway? I don't know. It's an entryway to talk about bigger issues. A lot of times somebody will say like, hey, let's get Michael, because he cares about people, to talk about, like, I don't know, race, age, sexism, something like that. And I'll say, okay, cool, why am I here? And then, so a lot of my day-to-day stuff is trying to get people to not hire me for stuff. And so I'll be like, why am I the person here? Am I diversity to you? And about 2 or 3 hours later, they're generally saying things like, oh, I guess we do need to care for more than just selling more widgets. And so that's a lot of that. And then I do a lot of work trying to support other people in their work. So I open up the studio a lot for folks. I'm oftentimes, like, I do a lot of media related work, like podcasting and audio recording, video recording, things like that. So I try to just have a suite of stuff and then just use the tools as they need to be used for various things. I don't know if is that clear enough? That's a lot of words. Cool. All right. Basically, I don't have like a job, if you will. I just work all the time. I wake up, I work out, and I work. Yeah. Any other questions or anything? Yes. I'm coming to you.
Photographs on paper, or what are they on in there?
Oh, they are on. Yes, they are on paper. It is a very, very thin, almost fiber. It's kind of like not RC. It's kind of like a fiber paper, just very, very thin. Yeah.
Big?
4 feet by 5 feet, or 5 feet by 4 feet, depending on the photo. Yeah. And I saw another. Yes.
First of all, I love your jacket.
Thank you.
That's really cool. I just have to say that. I also know Oliver. I used to work with him.
Oh
A
yeah.
handful. It's fun.
Oliver's cool people. Yeah.
Well, 2 things. I was wondering if he put his voice into doing the makeup.
Mm-hmm.
Or was that
Absolutely.
direction?
It's a combination. So basically what we did as far as process is concerned is all of these were done in the studio, and this is going to come to those technical questions earlier. All these were done in the studio. And what we did was we sat down. It was like Lorna, the person who was going to be in the photograph, Oliver, and me, we just had a conversation for about an hour to an hour and a half with each person. And we asked them questions like, what do you really care about? If this was a record and you had all your singles, what are the stuff that you really want people to buy the album for? How do you feel, when do you feel most you? How would you want people, what is something that you want people to know that they wouldn't know by either looking at you or your resume and things like that? And then we asked about cultural questions, various experiences, what they feel comfortable with and what they don't feel comfortable with. And then we would create a concept and then do that concept in the moment. Yes, so yeah, it is honestly very important for me to make sure that other people's voices are involved in the process, and it's not just me being like, this is what we're doing, you do this, you do that, kind of thing.
So I think it's interesting, especially talking about art in an educational setting, I hear that finding your voice sentiment a lot. I'm just wondering what that means to you, exactly, like finding your voice.
Yeah, I think that's a very good question. I see a lot of media that I like and a lot that I don't like. And there are a lot of things from a technical perspective that I like and dislike, and then from a creative expression perspective also. And so what I found was that when I was doing, again, like I kind of came into this seriously later than I would have liked to. And so, which is fine. I still think I appreciate things in a way that I wouldn't have appreciated them for me personally had I done this the whole time. So it's all good. And I do slow projects. A lot of these projects take years for me to finish and everything. But but I would see all these really beautiful images, and I would try to emulate those things and just create them. And I did a lot of studying of an image, saying like, okay, if the catch light is here in the eyes, that means the light was here, and stuff like that. But it wasn't, but what I found was that no matter how beautiful an image can be, for me, it could be very boring if it lacked that sense of soul, or like it didn't really say anything or mean anything to me. Doesn't mean that it, like I said, like it doesn't mean that it doesn't have value or merit. It just wasn't for me. And I found that when I was looking at my own images, if I saw something that was technically quote unquote perfect, but still just, when I saw it, I was like, it's pretty, but it looks just like everybody else's thing, that I had to move on to figure out what is it that I needed to say. And so I started creating work that meant something to me, and I started looking at what do I want to see that doesn't exist yet? Or if it does exist, I haven't seen it. So that's a lot of it for me, and a lot of it is just the things that I care about. I'm involved with in the community in general. Like I work with a lot of young people. I work with a lot of people that are like dealing with various forms of trauma, homelessness, and things like that. So I'm always just asking them questions too, like where do you not see yourself seen that you want to see yourself seen, or what kinds of things do you like? And one of the projects that I don't have up here stemmed from a question when I asked somebody. It was a young black girl who was probably like 11, and I was like, so what kinds of things are you interested in? She was like, well, I really want to be a lawyer. I was like, well, that's cool. That's not what I asked you, but that's cool. But why you say that like you can't do it? And she was like, well, I'm kind of afraid to read. And I was like, what do you mean you're afraid to read? And she's like, well, every time I read, people make fun of me. I was like, why are they making fun of you? Do you know? And she goes, well, they call me a nerd. They say that I'm not supposed to read and things like that. And I was like, oh, okay. When was the last time you saw somebody like you reading? And she was like, I can't think of that. And a similar thing with a young boy who wanted to skateboard. He was like, it feels like whenever I skateboard, and things have changed a lot since I was their age. And I was like, you still feel uncomfortable skateboarding? And they were like, yeah, people make fun of me because I'm a black guy in the skate park. And so I'm like, okay, well, what if we did a whole thing with you where either you create your own images or I create them with you or for you or whatever, but they're like black people reading. And they're like, oh, that would be so cool. And so I do a lot of projects like that. And to me, that's a lot of where Finding My Voices has come, because I'm much more concerned with trying to communicate a message than creating something that people will double tap on. If that makes, and nothing against it, it's just not my thing. Yes, no, come here.
What's like the message for this collection?
This collection here, Lorna Murray, when she came to me, she was like, and this is one, I forgot who asked the question, so I'm going to try to make eye contact. Okay, cool. I mean, somebody asked a question about earlier. That was you? Okay, cool. All right, here we go. All right. Lorna was like, hey, there are some people that work in politics that oftentimes aren't seen as politicians, or they're not the traditional standard politician, if you will. So how can we create some portraits where they are much more vulnerable and human? And so this was, the voice here was the distinction between seeing someone and looking at someone. And especially when we talk about people that are traditionally marginalized for whatever set of reasons, these people specifically are often looked at or looked to, like Sharon is often known as the executive director, and Reagan Jackson is often known as the program director or coordinator of Young Women Empowered, but they're not always seen as whole people. And when we look at, or when we're not just looking, because not everybody can look, but if we research, study a lot of people in history, Martin Luther King Jr., Rosa Parks, whoever, a lot of times their lives are distilled into a single soundbite. And to me, that really diminishes who they are as whole human beings, complete with their flaws. And the idea here was to take back some of the resume stuff and bring forward the human stuff. And so the voice here is really, who is this person for real, that they, in a way that they feel comfortable expressing who they are. And that, like this person here, doggone it, thank you, Chandra. Chandra identifies as Native American, and her term, and because I don't know. Another thing about like terms is I try to be like, what terms do you prefer to be called and everything? Like, how do you feel comfortable? I want to use those terms. So Chandra says identifies as Native American, and a lot of times people don't see that she's a Native by looking at her because her skin is so bright. And this is a pattern that she wanted to put on her face to put that front and center to let people know that this is who I am. And also she only did it on one side because she occupies multiple spaces in different ways and wants to, and understands that she can use passing privilege to be able to push through certain agenda that wouldn't be able to be pushed through as easily had she had more salient features that showed her as Native. Does that answer your question?
Yeah.
Cool. Does that answer your question?
Yeah.
Cool. Yes.
So you're kind of hitting at something that I think about a lot, which is what I perceive and receive and interpret as a viewer versus what the creator intends. Mm-hmm. And I've learned so much more about this now that makes it so much richer. And I wonder, you can't speak for all creators, but can you speak for yourself about how can we as viewers find a way into that depth that you, and the intention that you're putting into it, that I might just not get?
Yeah, how much time do you have? I want to respect your time and everything. We haven't, we're already over time, huh? All right. Yeah. Okay, I will answer your question. I'll answer your question briefly. As far as I'm concerned, if you need to roll, not gonna hurt my feelings. I'm here as long as I need to be here until they kick me out of the room. But to answer your question about that specifically, I would say a couple things. For me, a lot of it is slowing down and really taking in the work, for one. I think for me, I live in a culture in which it's very easy to keep swiping through things, scrolling through things. Like attention spans are short nowadays and things. And so I tend to, what I would like to do is really sit down and try to, or stand, whatever, and just really take in the work and not just look at it as a piece that I can just kind of keep skimming through. Another thing I think is to ask questions and be in community with people, and not just the artists, but with the people that are involved in the process or featured in the process and things too, because there are a lot of things that I will see now that I wouldn't have noticed before had I not been actively in community with various types of people with various backgrounds and things. And then I think the other thing for me is to understand where your own assumptions are, where your own lived experiences are, and then try to, for me, I try to really understand, like, where am I coming from? And try to be really aware of that, because I have definitely seen myself or experienced myself dismissing somebody or something, or celebrating somebody or something without truly paying attention to where that's coming from. It's just something like, oh, I like this, cool, it must be right, or I don't like this, it must be wrong, or whatever the case is. But it's really, for me, going, okay, I like this because I value this. Is this fair for this situation or not fair for this situation? What has served me up until this point that no longer serves me? I grew up terrified of police. My first experience with a police officer, I was like 15. It was terrible. And I carried that throughout most of my time. Like even now, I do have a fear of police officers, but I have to understand that while a lot of that is justified and real, that I have to understand that there are individuals in everything, every field, and I need to understand that, okay, this is where I'm coming from. It could be right, it could be wrong, it could be right, but I still need to be aware of it and not just living in a constant state of assumption making. So those are the things that I would say for taking in the work. And I think we also have a set of systems, especially in the art world, that kind of separate the quote unquote patron or viewer from the artist, and it kind of puts the artist up here or like behind a wall or something like that. And I feel like there are a lot of things systematically we can do to change that so that we are in community with each other and with our artists and not just kind of exalting people and stuff too.
Thank you for that answer.
Yeah, absolutely. Yes.
I'm just going to say, we probably should be at the last question, and I'm not going to ask it. I'm going to point to Paul, who asked a beautiful
Yeah.
question at the beginning about how you get people to be true. And I think you got at it in your talk. But is there Paul, you might want to reiterate your...
Oh,
Yeah.
that moment that you...
Yeah.
Wait, this shadow.
I take my time with folks. I mean, that's the short answer is I take time. For portraits like this, I'll oftentimes book like a 3-hour session or something with folks. And most of the actual photography portion of it is probably 10 minutes or so. But I like to make sure that people can deal with traffic, get comfortable, be hydrated, ask questions and things like that. I want people to know that they are human first, and that there is space for them to be human and to be their own person and everything. And so I'll say things like what I said here, like what do you need to feel comfortable in this space? I want this space to be safe for you, and I know safe means different things for different people, and try to create that environment where somebody can actually feel like they are safe, they're respected, they're treated with dignity, and a lot of that kind of shows up in the photograph. And so by the time the camera is actually pointed at somebody, they are comfortable with what the project is, what the process is. And then I just wait. Like I don't snap a lot of photos. I generally, I think for each of these images here, there were a total of maybe 8 or 9 images created. And oh yeah. Hey, different strokes, different folks. I'm not here to judge how you do it, but that's how I do it. So I normally treat it like it's a roll of film. And there was a technical question about the quality. I try to get everything as perfect in camera as possible: exposure, framing, composition, all that, so that when we blow things up, it's not like I'm having to create pixels where pixels don't exist. And I use a lot of film too. Yeah.